I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the Delphi murders, a case that absolutely shook a small community in Indiana. But as this trial nears, there are some wondering if the man going on trial is the actual killer. Here's the story. We'll get that for you in just a moment. But for those of you not familiar with this story, it's the story of Libby and Abby, two young girls who just wanted to go for a hike. When a relative came back to pick them up, they weren't there. There was a search, and they found their bodies in the woods. It was a case that went unsolved for 5 years. Painful for the families, scary for the community. Finally, someone was arrested, but it was someone who was not on the radar at all. There were a lot of people were talking about as potential suspects, but not the man who was arrested. Richard Allen is his name. He's getting ready to begin this trial. Here's more. Teenagers Abby Williams and Libby German were best friends living in the small rural community of Delphi, Indiana. On February 13th, 2017, the girls had a day off from school, so they decided to go on an outdoor adventure. They were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge. While on that bridge, Libby recorded a man with her phone, uttering the words. It was down the hill where Libby and Abby would be murdered. Prosecutors say the man on the bridge is responsible, and that man is Richard Allen. But Allen and his attorneys say prosecutors have it all wrong. They say Allen is innocent, and it was someone else on the bridge that day who took the lives of these two innocent girls. And as you look at that, the environment is extremely significant in this case where they were. They're going hiking in an area where there weren't a lot of people. There were these really high, frightful bridges, old rickety bridges crossing over huge ravines. There's a river, there's woods, there's a lot going on at the scene where they went and where they were found that day when they were discovered. So as they prepare for the trial in this case, the defense wants the jury to go to the scene. They want a jury view. Take a look. Defense motion for jury view. Richard Allen, by counsel, pursuant to the rules, asked for a court to order that the impaneled jury be transported to the Freedom Bridge, the Monon High Bridge, and to the site where the bodies of the victims were located. Now, we cover trials all around the country here at Court TV. And in states like Massachusetts, it's almost automatic that the jury is going to go to the scene because it's one way for them to get to the truth and figure out what happened. And both sides usually agree, but take a look here. The state doesn't want the jury to see the scene. The state objects to the jury going out to view those areas requested by the defense. The terrain where the bodies were found is very difficult to traverse and would be dangerous for the jury to get to. Well, if it's difficult to traverse, then maybe the jury should know that. That traveling to where the bodies were found and to the opposite end of the Monon High Bridge would involve encroaching on two private landowners' property. Okay, get a court order. Okay, that it would require a substantial amount of time and resources to take the jury to those areas while ensuring that they are sequestered from the public and outside influences. That's absurd. That's absurd, okay? There was a jury view in the Murdoch case. Give me a break. That the areas of where the bodies were found along with the site of the old CPS, that's the Child Protective Services building, are substantially different from the time the crimes occurred. Yeah, things change over time. You explain the difference. But it's about where this place is and where that place is. You know how I feel, but this brings us to our first question of our investigation. Should the jury go down the hill and see where these girls were found? See the bridge in whatever state it's in now. They'll have pictures as well of where this bridge was. How far did they walk? What could you see? What could you hear? It's all so important. Joining me, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald and criminal defense attorney Bob Motta. I usually can't answer these questions that quickly. This one I can, because that's just the way I feel. I want the jury to get to the truth. More is better. But anyway, Barbara, you went to where the bodies were found. So before we talk about this, because Bob's chomping at the bit, let's take a look so everyone knows what we're talking about here.
Well, here we are, guys, on Ron Logan's property. This is Deer Creek. The Monon High Bridge is over that way. And over here is where the bodies were. I want to give you guys just a little taste of what the ground is like here. So there's the creek, which Ron says because of drought is very low right now, much lower than it was at the time of the crime. But even to come up here, this is pretty steep, slippery. The ground is soft. There's a lot of leaves down to trees. And it is not an easy walk. And then you could over to this area where it's flat. And this is where they were found.
Okay, Barbara, so how would you describe the area and the trip, you know, from the Monon High Bridge to down the hill where the bodies were found, the Freedom Bridge, that whole area?
Well, that particular trip I actually did with Ron Logan. He walked me down there. I was working with HLN at the time, and we had a photographer, and Ron agreed to walk both of us down there. The walk from his property down is very steep. He needed to steady me. He held his hand out for me and helped me down the hill and then back up the hill. I've also gone to the south end of the bridge and gone down the hill that the person in Libby's video was directing the girls down. It's a much steeper hill, requires you to almost be on your butt to get down it. That's how I got down it anyway. And then I walked over to the creek and actually crossed the creek back onto Ron's property. And all of that area is private property. Those are homeowners that have over the years had people traipsing across their property all the time in pursuit of answers in this case, and something they've grown very tired of. I would imagine if the request was made of them to allow the jury onto their property, they probably would not welcome that. And then, yes, I believe it is a dangerous walk for the jurors. You need to be in some relative shape. Depending on who ends up on that jury, it could be a dangerous walk.
And Bob Motta, you could take the jury there. If it's too dangerous to walk down, they can see how dangerous it is to walk down. What are your thoughts on this? Because my thoughts are this is part of the story. Like, how did the girls get from point A to point B? And how many people would it take to do it? What was it like? Could someone like the defendant do it? I mean, these are all important questions in the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, you took my entire answer, Vinnie, like always.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure I'm on course here.
Yeah, it's you're dead on. You know, if you can't bring the object in question into the courtroom, then I mean, it's been around for as long as we've been trying cases in this country. Then you bring the trier of fact to where the object is, and in this case, you nailed it. I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's part of the case. It's an integral part of the case. The topography, in terms of how difficult it is for one person to control two people in that area. I think that the jury has to see for themselves. I mean, I didn't understand it until I went out there myself. You know, it's one thing to look at the videos and, you know, see all the things that we all see, but to be out there is a completely different thing.
Yeah, it was the same thing when the Murdoch jury went on A View, and I went to the same place they went. And once I went there, I'd seen maps, I'd seen Google Maps, I've seen pictures, crime scene, all of that, videos. Once I went there, I was like, oh, yeah, he did it. There's no way anyone else was just going to end up here. It was so illuminating for me to get to the truth. So I want to put a map up on the screen just to give you an idea of what's happening in all of this, in the allegations. February 13th, 2017, 1:49 p.m., Abby and Libby dropped off across from Mears Farm, which is located on the north side of County Road 300 near the entrance of the trails. 2:13, video from Libby's cell phone shows the girls encountered a man on the southeast portion of the Monon High Bridge. The video shows the girls walking southeast on the bridge. The male orders the girls down the hill. That's such a big part of this story. Maybe they should see what that hill looks like. February 14th, 2017, the girls' bodies are discovered. Clothing found in Deer Creek, south of where the bodies were located as well. Now, Barbara, you mentioned having to cross the creek as well. That would have had to have happened that day, right?
That's what a lot of people believe likely happened. We don't know for sure that that's the route that they took, but from that south end of the bridge to get to Ron Logan's property, you pretty much do have to cross the creek. At different times of the year, it's different depths. From what I understand, at the time of the murders, from people who walked the creek in that immediate area where it makes sense that the girls would have crossed it, that it would have been maybe about a foot or 18 inches deep, the water. There is a bit of a sandbar in that creek, and so the entire width of the creek where Ron Logan's property is, it's not all water. Some of it, it's almost like an island from the sandbar, and then you have a smaller path of water that goes through there. And then it widens up in other areas, and it is much wider at other parts of the creek.
Bob, let me ask you about one other thing that the prosecution is concerned about, that it's, again, being private property, but it is the scene of a crime. I think crimes have occurred on private property before. I'm not sure. I might be, out there on this. But can a judge, does the judge have a power to order that the jury be able to go there? Is it something that could be litigated if, in case the landowners didn't want anyone on their property, and maybe like order to show cause or something?
I'm sure the judge can definitely draft up an order. The question is, if you get resistance from the property owners, what are you going to do at that point? I kind of have the opposite position in terms of what Barbara thinks, that the property owners might give some resistance to it. I think that they'd probably be more than willing to allow the jury in this case that has haunted this community for so long, if it's going to help get to the truth. I just think that they'll be all about it, to be honest with you. I don't think that at this point in time, when we finally get this trial that everybody's been waiting for, that they would do anything to kind of impede that from moving forward. But if that did happen, I think that the judge would probably rule with an iron fist and get it done. I think one way or another, if she rules that she's going to allow the view, that they're going to do the view.
Yeah, my guess is if the defense is asking for it, she will deny it. Right? I mean, that's the way the case has been going for the most part. So I don't think they're going to have a view here. But Barbara, from your perspective, right, having, researched and covered the story in the case and then actually being there, was it different when you were actually standing there looking at the hill going down? Was there more of an understanding of what could have happened here?
Yeah, it was more of an understanding of how large the space is between the south end of the bridge and the walk that they would have had to make to get to the creek, and then crossing the creek to get over onto Ron Logan's property, if that is in fact the route that they took that day. It cemented, I think, for me, that whoever did that, whoever led them on that walk, had to have been somebody who was familiar with the area. from being on the bridge where you're in an area where you could be seen by other people who are using the trails that day, to get them down onto that particular part of Ron Logan's property is a pretty secluded area where you would have some privacy to do whatever it is you're going to be doing. You know, another thing, Vinnie, I think with this jury view, it could help the defense by showing the parking area where they allege that Richard Allen parked that day. Because when you see it and you see how wide open that spot is, you realize that it seems like not a very good choice if you're planning to go out there and commit a crime, and kind of calls into question the idea that he would have walked on 300 North to get back to that area if he in fact had blood on his clothing from this crime, and he would have been in full view of anybody using the roadway that day.
All right, Bob Motta, Barbara McDonald staying with us. Coming up, will Richard Allen get a fair trial?
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it?
Sarah Boone is charged with second-degree murder after her boyfriend suffocated inside of a suitcase.
He's in the suitcase still. There are multiple domestic violence incidents.
You two hitting each other.
Sarah.
That's my name. Don't wear it up.
He told you, Sarah, I can't breathe.
George Torres locked inside of a suitcase, begging for help.
I thought he was okay.
The Suitcase Murder Trial. Live coverage starting Monday morning, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you! Shame on you, Richard! You're going to prison for the rest of your life! Shame on you, Richard Allen!
Richard Allen being brought into the courthouse there. One thing about the arrest of Richard Allen and the way this case has transpired, he, as an accused, has been treated much differently than most murder defendants in cases that we watch here on Court TV. He's been put in a prison rather than in a jail. He's had his attorneys taken away from him, had to fight to get him back. I mean, a lot of things have happened to Richard Allen that don't normally happen in most cases, and he looks horrific right now. Looks like 1/3 of the man that he was, and it may be because he's guilty and he feels all of it happening. But all of this, the treatment and the way this has all transpired brings me to my next question, which is, will Richard Allen get a fair trial? That could be interpreted many different ways, from rulings to the jury to how things have transpired. They're still with me, Barbara McDonald and Bob Motta. Bob, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think at the end of the day, he's going to get a fair trial?
I mean, it's like you said, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. If I'm looking at the rulings that have been made, I mean, essentially at this point, as far as what we know, the defense has been shut down from putting forth any kind of defense, at least with respect to third-party culprits. They can't mention the Odin thing, can't mention any of the suspects that they've identified that were identified by law enforcement themselves, 3 other officers. So in terms of those kinds of rulings, it's going to be tough. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, if he gets convicted, the appellate court's going to have to look at it, and I think it's ultimately going to come down to, I think that she was wrong on many of these rulings. I think that her blocking them from being able to put in a third-party culprit, when I personally think that there was a nexus, as much of a nexus as there is with Allen, short of them being able to place them at the bridge. And I'm talking about the 5 individuals that they named. I mean, had they done that, those guys would have been arrested. Those guys would have been the defendants. If they were able to place those guys with the other stuff that they had, including the one guy who, you know, confessed to it, you know, we're looking at 5 different defendants. But for the fact that they weren't able to put them at the bridge that day, doesn't mean they weren't at the bridge that day. So, you know, it's tough, man. You know, but the confessions are going to weigh heavily, you know, depending on what those are. 61 confessions is, a nightmare for any defense attorney. And even when it gets to the appellate level, if there are confessions that have facts that only Allen could have known, how do you overcome that? Even if there are issues in terms of rulings that she's made, I think that the appellate court will look at it and be like, yeah, but he confessed 61 times. You know what I'm saying?
It'll keep coming back to that. It will keep coming. You're so right, Bob. Barbara, when you look at this case, I mean, through the 5 years when it was unsolved, there were other people who were really being looked at by the task force. You remember some members of the task force that were here? Obviously, everyone that's covering the story, the owner of the property. I mean, everyone was kind of in the mix. This guy was off the grid, and then once he got arrested, it was like none of that stuff ever happened. It was completely forgotten,
right,
and won't be brought up necessarily at the trial.
Right, and that's something that jurors aren't going to hear about Ron Logan. They're not going to hear about Kegan Kline. Kegan Kline was the subject of the press release from Indiana State Police begging anybody with information on this fake catfishing account, and Kegan was the guy behind it. He has since been sentenced to prison on unrelated charges to Abby and Libby's case. Ron Logan served some time in prison for a probation violation that came out of them looking at him in connection with this case. We do have a probable cause affidavit written by the FBI that says he is the killer, and evidence would be in his home, but he's not going to hear about any of that. And, you know, the other thing I think that really goes hand in hand with this, in addition to these rulings by this judge, is her decision not to allow cameras in court or any electronic items. Reporters are going to be covering this trial with paper and pen.
Yep, no transparency in that courtroom. All right, Barbara McDonald, Bob Mata, thank you so much. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the Delphi murders. This case is a case that the true crime community has been intensely following for 7 years now. And now with the trial looming, some believe that the wrong man has been charged. Here's the story.
It was a mystery that broke the hearts of two families, terrified a small community, and touched the world. The murders of two young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German. The case became known as the Delphi Murders. The setting, a small Indiana town of just 3,000 people. From the beginning, investigators suspected it was someone local, which made it even more difficult for everyone from this town. It started on February 13th, 2017, when Libby and Abby went hiking. The two teenagers were good friends and had the day off from school. The weather was unseasonably warm, but when Libby and Abby didn't show up when they were supposed to get picked up, their families began to worry and they began to search. Then the next day, the bodies of these two girls were found, both victims of murder. Then over the course of the next 5+ years, there were no answers, no arrests, just a series of disjointed clues, like two sketches that looked nothing alike, a video of the suspected killer, and a short audio recording of his voice. Then things got even stranger when police said they were looking for anyone connected to an Anthony Schatz social media account, which was not connected to the male model in the photos, but connected instead to this man who was arrested for child pornography. Then came the arrest of Richard Allen for the murders of the girls. Someone who was not on anyone's radar, someone no one had ever mentioned as a suspect or as a person of interest. And now prosecutors say he is the Delphi killer.
It really was surprising when Richard Allen was arrested. Like, no one had been talking about Richard Allen, the guy from the local CVS. I want you to take a look at this. I have a piece of the Court TV documentary, Delphi Murders, the case against Richard Allen. And this is the part where they focus on his arrest, because it was 5 years and these sort of cryptic clues being released by law enforcement, and they didn't seem to be connected, and they were all very confusing. Let's watch.
In October of 2022, surprisingly, we got word that there was an arrest.
What? Disbelief. Like, okay, I'm hearing this, but it's a process.
Like the rest of national media, I showed up to watch that press conference to announce the arrest, not knowing what to expect.
Today is not a day to celebrate, but the arrest of Richard M. Allen of Delphi on 2 counts of murder is sure a major step in leading to the conclusion of this long-term and complex investigation.
We expected to be excited and happy and overjoyed that he's arrested, but now we're dealing with understanding that there's a lot of reopening wounds that's coming with that.
My name's Dan Semitovich. I'm the producer and co-host of Down the Hill, the Delphi Murders podcast. My first reaction, I think everyone's first reaction, was, who? We had no idea who this was.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you!
My name is Nicholas McClellan. I'm the Carroll County prosecutor. Mr. Allen has had his initial hearing. He's entered a preliminary plea of not guilty, and he is in custody. He's being held currently without bond.
Here comes a guy that has never, ever been announced. He was nobody's radar. It was like, where did this guy come from?
Richard Matthew Allen was 50 years old, had no criminal history, and worked as a farm tech over at the local CVS in Delphi.
I was surprised because he seemed like a real nice guy and everything, waiting on us in the drive-thru and everything.
I had not interacted with him, but everyone knew who he was. I mean, he worked there for so long. And when I found out who it was, I never in a million years thought that it would have been him. Not someone so integral to the community and to the Delphi experience.
So now prosecutors believe they have enough to prove that he's the man, that he is the one who did it. Someone, again, who sort of came out of left field in all this. So that brings me to a really important question in this case, which is, what is the evidence against Richard Allen? Prosecutors have the burden beyond any and all reasonable doubt. They absolutely are convinced they have the evidence and they have the right man. Joining me to help answer this question, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald and the YouTube live streamer behind Gray Hughes Investigates. Gray Hughes is with us. Great to have you both here. Barbara, you were covering this story. Both of you were covering this story for a long, long time. Your reaction, Barbara, when a man named Richard Allen was the one?
I remember getting a tip prior to the announcement, the public announcement, that somebody named Rick Allen had been arrested, and like everyone else said, who? I immediately called some of the family members of Libby, and they were feeling the same way. They said, from what we understand, he's a local guy, but we don't know him, and he'd never been talked about. He was on nobody's radar. I mean, totally out of left field.
Well, I believe he should have been on everyone's radar because of what I read in the probable cause affidavit. Take a look at this. Investigators, right, this is a high-profile case, like super high profile. Investigators reviewing prior tips encountered a tip narrative from an officer who interviewed Richard Allen in 2017. That narrative stated Mr. Allen was on the trail between 1330 and 1530. That's 1:30 and 3:30. While at the Freedom Bridge, he saw 3 females. He noted one was taller and had brown or black hair. He did not remember the description, nor did he speak with them. He walked from the Freedom Bridge to the High Bridge. He did not see anybody, although he stated he was watching a stock ticker on his phone as he walked. He puts himself there, Gray Hughes. I mean, that's important evidence in the case. But my goodness, this evidence seemingly was buried for 5 years. Like a man who said he was there and no one's, doing any follow-up with him?
Yeah, well, they'll be able to tell if he was using his phone, whether or not he's lying about the stock ticker, because to use a stock ticker, you have to be connected to the, the cell phone tower, right? So that should place him at the bridge at that time if he was telling the truth. I mean, one thing I always thought, if that conservation officer who interviewed Richard Allen back then had a picture of Richard Allen, of the bridge guy, the image that was released to the public.
Right.
And when Richard Allen said, yeah, I was there, had he said, yeah, we know you're there, here's a picture of you. It's a trail camera that took a picture of everybody. He probably would have said, oh yeah, that's me. And then boom, they would have had him all those years ago, like a week after the homicides. So,
and that's what's making this case, I think, more challenging for prosecutors, because they sat on the most important piece of evidence for 5 years, that someone said, yeah, I was there, and there was no follow-up interview or questioning or investigation of the man who said he was there by himself. Now, I want to read this from the probable. Go ahead, Barbara.
I was going to say, they also wrote his name down wrong in that tip. They wrote Richard Allen Whiteside because he lived on Whiteside Drive in Delphi. And so had anybody followed up on it, they might have been following up on a Richard Whiteside and not a Richard Matthew Allen.
That's a great point. Another mistake. But at some point, they were able to track him down 5 years later. I think after someone looked at a piece of paper and said, wait a minute, there's a man who says he was there, and we haven't talked to him. This is also from the probable cause affidavit. The Indiana State Police Lab performed an analysis on Allen's Sig Sauer model P226. The lab determined the unspent round located within 2 feet of the victim, of victim 2's body, had been cycled through Richard Allen's Sig Sauer model P226. An identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and sufficient agreement of individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random striated impressed marks as evidenced by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns or of surface contours. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner in training and experience. If the witness testifies like that, it's going to go nowhere because that's gobbledygook. Gray Hughes, what is the evidence of the bullet, the Sig Sauer? What does it mean?
Well, there's people out there that, don't believe that that's very good science, but actually one of Richard Allen's, the secondary attorneys that came on, remember how when these 2 attorneys were removed and then there was a second attorneys that came on, one of them was on a station saying, oh, that's really damning evidence, before he was an attorney for him. So there must be some credibility to it. It's ejection marks on the shell of the bullet, right? Like when it's ejected, ejection marks. I don't know if that's as accurate as if it's been fired and you check the striations on the actual bullet itself. And I'm sure they'll bring in their experts trying to show how that's not accurate. And then the state's going to bring in theirs showing how it is accurate. And they'll probably show they probably ejected many bullets from that gun to see if it created the same pattern. But, they did find the bullet right then, that first day. There's a lot of people out there that say it was found later and different dates. And, you'd have to believe in this massive conspiracy cover-up to believe in some sort of, the Odinist theory that they just planted the bullet there. There's so much wild speculation.
Oh, there's
online.
a lot. There absolutely is a lot. Barbara McDonald, one other huge piece of evidence, and we've been talking about it, is the 61 alleged confessions. What's the story behind, you say 61 confessions, people are going to say, okay, he's guilty.
Right, but these confessions didn't happen during his police interview, which is frequently when you hear about confessions, that's when it comes out. This was months after he had been taken into custody and put in a maximum security prison in a solitary confinement area, essentially being held like he was on death row at the time. And the prison psychologist was treating him for psychosis because of behavior that was bizarre and definitely unusual. They were treating him against his will for that psychosis. And it's during that period of time in this maximum security prison that these 61 confessions came out. We have not heard them yet, but they are all going to be entered as evidence
they're all recorded.
This trial.
Yeah. Let me bring something up. Do you mind if I bring something up?
We have like 10 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay, the first confession, though, was on a phone call with his mother and grandmother, I guess, or his wife and his mother, and that wasn't when he was diagnosed as being psychotic. That was his first one. And it was after that his defense team told him to be psychotic, in my opinion.
We shall see. Stay where you are. They're trying the case already. Still to come. Real another big question. Is Richard Allen bridge guy?
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV.
You chose the place. You chose the victim. Back of the head, execution style.
The two girls were reported missing on Monday, February 13th. The bodies were discovered about 12:15 on the 14th in the woods just east of town here by volunteers that helped in the search of the children after they were reported missing to the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. Family has been notified. This is considered a double homicide investigation. No further information will be released at this time.
Can't imagine what those two girls went through, best friends, but they were brave and they were able to record the killer on video and hear his voice. Investigators, while they were still trying to figure this out, released a small piece of video and a small piece of audio. We've put them together here for you. Take a look. And for years, he was known as the bridge guy. The bridge guy. And everyone wanted to know, you know, is this the killer? This is the killer? Well, can't we figure it out? That brings me to my next question. Because they've accused Richard Allen, so is Richard Allen the bridge guy? Is that man there the same man walking over the bridge that day? Still with me, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald and YouTube live streamer behind Gray Hughes Investigates, Gray Hughes. I want to put a map up for everyone so you just have an idea of the area that we're talking about here, where important parts of the story. Investigators say they observed a vehicle that resembled Allen's 2016 Ford Focus on the Hoosier Harvest Store video at 1:27 p.m. traveling westbound on CR 300 North in front of the Hoosier Harvest Store, which coincided with his statement that he arrived around 1:30 at the trails. Investigators note that witnesses described the vehicle parked at the former CPS Child Protective Services building as a PT Cruiser, small SUV, or smart car. Investigators believe those descriptions are similar to the 2016 Ford Focus. So, is the man getting out of the Focus? Is that, in fact, Richard Allen? Gray, I know you've taken a close look at this, probably the first guy to really do it, and analyze this. What are your thoughts about the video of Bridge Guy and Richard Allen?
Well, I think the image of the guy in the video, Bridge Guy, is very consistent with what Richard Allen looks like in person. There's some images that he took of himself out there, and I think it's consistent with him. You see him drive by the Hoosier Harvest Store at 1:27. A vehicle matching the description of his vehicle drives by at 1:27. And remember, he originally said he got there at around 1:30, right? So that matches that. And then, I mean, I don't know if you want me to get to this part, but there's like the there's 3 girls that are at a bench at 126, and they're heading out right at that time, and they pass him, corroborating the fact that his original story was true, that he got there at 1:30. And they pass those 3 girls, and those 3 girls keep walking. And then later, another witness with the first name of Betsy, she parks her car at like 1:47, and she walks down the trail and sees Richard Allen, or a guy that looks just like Richard Allen described himself. I mean, the clothing that Richard Allen said he was wearing matches the guy on the bridge absolutely perfectly. And this lady walks up, sees him, turns around, and walks back and passes Abby and Libby, because they were just dropped off 3 or 4 minutes after her. And guess what? Those Abby and Libby, the next person they're going to see is, I believe, Richard Allen on the bridge, who he said was looking at fish. So I'm 100% myself certain that that's Richard Allen. I don't have any doubt, or it's not confusing to me. I think he's absolutely boxed in. And the lady Betsy, she clears the entire path when she goes into the bridge and then turns around and then walks all the way back and then goes back to her car. That means she clears it again. So she doesn't see Richard Allen walking in that area either, or the bridge guy, right? And then those 3 girls who were there at 12:43 at the bridge, then they walked out and they were at that other bench at 126. They cleared the entire trail at like 12:20 all the way to 1:30. They didn't see him until they were leaving.
And isn't there a photo at 126 that helps with the timeline here?
Yeah.
Describe that photo.
126. There's 2 girls just at a bench, and they're taking I don't know if it's a selfie or somebody's taking a picture of them, but they're right there at that bench at 126, and then they exit. They're leaving right after that, and they pass Richard Allen. His original story was 1:30 to 3:30, then he changed it to 12 to 1:30 when he was interviewed after he was arrested. But when he was interviewed 5 years prior to that, it was 1:30 to 3:30, according to the conservation officer.
All right, Barbara, is Richard Allen the bridge guy? What are the issues that have come up through the years and now since Richard Allen's arrest?
Well, Gray makes a very compelling case, absolutely. And all of that is true. But also, there are a lot of men who look very similar, who dress very similar, and we don't know who all was out there on the trails that day. If there were other people, these witnesses didn't report seeing anybody else other than this one man. So that definitely looks bad for Richard Allen. But it is a very common look. And the problem with Libby's video is it's not of a quality that you can blow it up and see any more detail. It's from a distance, as she was moving, as he was moving. And so it's what you see there is the best
That's the best quality you can get.
Can't really be.
All right, we're
Right.
getting Barbara McDonald, Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube. Thank you both so much. This case has been shrouded in secrecy from the beginning. Investigators shared very little information with the public, and now the judge overseeing this is not going to allow the public to watch this trial on television or on a live stream on the internet. Now, here's the problem. When you don't have transparency, and there are people already questioning whether or not the right man's been arrested, so no one's going to see the evidence, no one's going to hear the testimony, will the public, at the end of all of this, trust the verdict when it's rendered? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.